Susan, if you want to start off with the brief introduction, and then Brian will pick it up from there, and we'll hear from Cliff and Maura. That sounds good.
Sure. Wait, just lost it. So many windows. So we're going to start with Article 12. And this article concerns property at Washington and Swanton Streets. It's about 3 acres of land. And there's a traffic light on the corner, and along Washington Street is a 1-story row of storefronts. And then heading back along Swanton Street are some retail properties. This property's been dormant for a number of years. In 2012, CVS Pharmacy applied for a permit to build a retail store, a new big retail store of about 14,000 square feet in size. The planning board and neighbors around the area had many objections. The proposal was scaled down, and eventually a permit was granted, but it was appealed, went all the way through the land court, which eventually handed down a decision in 2017 in the negative. So ultimately, CVS dropped the idea. The property has since gone through a couple of ownership changes, but it's still unoccupied. What the select board is looking for permission to do with this article is to go through a process of eminent domain, to buy the land, and then work with an experienced affordable housing developer to design and build a multi-unit mixed income property that would fit into the surrounding neighborhood. This would be a so-called friendly 40B, since the property is zoned for general business use. But again, much of the surrounding land is residential. Excuse me. The process we would follow would be very much like the one that we're going through now with the Waterfield lot, which is downtown. This is along Washington Street. And the town would put out a request for proposals, send in, and see what was sent in, and then identify a qualified developer. And there would be opportunities for input from other town boards and committees, as well as from the community at large. This would help the town address the shortage of affordable housing and revive this highly visible and underutilized corner lot. As a starting point, the board enlisted some knowledgeable consultants and the town planner to help us make a sort of a threshold determination whether it would be feasible from a design as well as a financial standpoint. So we have architect Cliff Bomer, an affordable housing financial advisor, Maura Songus, along with real estate attorney, Mark Bobrowski. They're going to present just some simple sketches, concept level sketches of what the site layout would look like, and whether that could be financeable as an affordable housing project. So I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Susan. So this is the language for Article 12. It's giving the town would be voting to authorize the select board to acquire the land through available funds or borrow the sum of up to $3.15 million for a mixed income project at the corner of Washington and Swanton. There we go. Just a plan view of the site, the corner of Washington and Swanton Street. It consists of 3 parcels where there's currently 3 structures. As Select Board Member Verdicchio said, this was the site of a potential CVS, and then since then there has been a proposed friendly 40B. With that project being stalled once COVID-19 affected the lending of that project. This was the project that was proposed at the time within the past year, with roughly 60 units, 25% affordable. So it would be considered a 40B, but this was not going to be rental. This was going to be home ownership, so condos. But it was generally well received by the neighborhood. And they appreciated the scale of the building and like the mixed use aspect of this as well, not just housing here. There was also a potential for 2,600 square feet of commercial space. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cliff to explain three feasibility studies that he and his team worked out on. So Cliff, why don't you take it away?
Thanks a lot. I wanted to, my name's Cliff Bomer. I'm an architect at Davis Square Architects. We're a firm that specializes in multifamily developments and have done it. We're in our 37th year now. I want to just give you a couple thoughts to put these sketches in context. These are not designs; they really are feasibility studies, and as such, they're really things that we think we kind of gave ourselves some rules about how the scale of the buildings. To us, it was important that the scale of the buildings make sense. We know there was previously, I think it was up to 60 units. You just saw that a condominium development that was a 3-story development, and with sloped roofs on top of that. The rules that I gave myself in looking at this were even a little bit stricter as far as building height. Uh, these studies all show 2.5-story buildings, so that means there is a 3rd floor that's habitable, but it's up in the roof space of the building, so it isn't a full footprint 3rd story. So it was a little kind of brought scale down even a little bit more from what you've seen before. I also looked at some different ideas about ownership models, which actually relate to how financeable the project could be. So with a lot of constraints on it, I think the overall conclusion is the site is certainly eminently developable with a variety of schemes that really could present themselves to the community in different ways. So again, strictly feasibility, these are not designs, but I just want you to know that there were some kind of harsh rules that I imposed on myself in looking at these, including a parking count. For me, a minimum of the parking was 1-to-1 for units, whether they're rental or home ownership. There's at least one parking space for every apartment. All of these schemes show surface parking. That is, they're open to the air. They're not within the footprints of the buildings. They're not under a platform or anything like that. And a lot of that was really just economy driven, showing schemes that I knew are generally affordable in this kind of scale for this kind of site. So having said that, this first scheme is fairly straightforward. It puts a larger building on Washington Street, which is, of course, a broader street. Usually, broader streets can handle bigger buildings and still feel pleasant, still create a good pedestrian environment. So the idea of this scheme is a mixed scheme that has home ownership and rental units. In this scheme, again, in a 2.5-story building. And this was, I was thinking all residential. If it's not fully residential, that unit count could change. But in this scheme, there are 26 rental apartments and 16 home ownership townhouse type of units. There are 44 parking spaces and 42 apartments total. So a little bit over the 1-to-1 ratio. But again, this is just one look at how to do it. If it were a full 3 stories like the Melanson scheme was, you could include commercial space in this kind of footprint very easily and not lose units if you fully occupied a 3rd floor instead of that 2.5-story idea that I looked at in this study. The second scheme is a 100% rental scheme. This is actually, I think, from the perception of the neighborhood, more similar to the scheme that the Melanson scheme that you saw previously. In this scheme, there are 50 rental apartments and 50 parking spaces. Again, this was completely surface parking, no notion of parking under the building. That doesn't mean it's not feasible. It is feasible to look at that kind of parking scheme as well, if that turned out to be a really important design criterion. And the last scheme is another idea of a mixed development. This time it kind of flips it around and puts the home ownership units on both of the streets. So that becomes the face on the street. And thinking that perhaps that could give an opportunity for the apartment building in the back, the rental unit at the back of the site, to be a taller building. So in this one, I did assume the same kind of scale that you saw in the Melanson scheme. This is a full 3 stories. It could still have sloped roofs, much like the kinds of images you've seen already. But the idea was to put the short elevation of that larger building fronting on Swanton Street. So still, I think, keeping it in a respectable scale for the neighborhood. This is a good scheme that I think it's easy to imagine that even though in this one you have a exactly 1-to-1 ratio, there are 14 home ownership units that screen the parking from the public, which is, I think, generally speaking, a good urban design scheme, which is not put parking visible from the roadways. And then a larger building in the back that could potentially have an access to parking beneath the building off of Swanton Street to supplement the parking spaces. So I think that, again, I'll repeat the main point of this study was to look at schemes that we think are genuinely financeable from the sources that are commonly used to produce this kind of housing. And from my personal perspective, it's always important to make a scheme that really enhances the neighborhood, fits into the neighborhood. And I think this site, it really can work. And there are certainly other variations. Again, I didn't look at 10, I looked at 3 ideas. I think I can leave it at that. I'm certainly open for any questions that could come up.
So I think we had a question in the chat about whether this could be feasible as a 40R. And thought maybe Maura could weigh in on that, or if you have some thoughts too, Cliff.
If Maura doesn't weigh in, I could. Are you there, Maura?
I am here. Yeah, Cliff,
Okay.
go for it.
Well, I think the answer is yes, right? I think there are advantages to a 40R development. There are financial incentives for doing that. So I'm not aware of any reason that it's not feasible. Are you, Maura? Yeah.
Can I chime in, Cliff?
Whoop. Cliff, we lost you.
Yes. Sorry. No, I'm still here. Just pushing the wrong button.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to chime in on 40R because I'm still active in doing many of them. The program director is Bill Rail at DHCD, and I've had conversations with him recently about the money which is available. So that's a continuing feature. It's pretty simple to get a read from Bill. He's one of those noble public servants who will tell you almost immediately whether or not it has a green light, red light, or a yellow light. And he does it typically by looking at it on Google Earth, get an idea for the amenities and services that are nearby. As you know, under 40R, it's location, location, location. It has to be within a half a mile of a train station or a site that's been previously developed. By that, he means usually 50% under asphalt or impervious surface. or the third category is very flexible, highly suitable site that isn't covered by category 1 or 2. And generally, I find him to be quite amenable to a discussion, if not an immediate seal of approval. Not that that will ultimately be the final answer, but in terms of planning and getting going, he's pretty quick to give you the green light. And knowing this location, I think he would look favorably upon it.
And I think Brian has mentioned in the chat that this is something we could put in the request for proposals, the RFP, and then see what people came up with.
Sure, unlike a 40B, 40R requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting. It's got its own zoning, smart growth overlay district, and the rules are basically written for the project in the zoning. And there's also a pretty complicated application that has to be filled out. The DHCD has to give approval before the town votes on it, but those are pretty simultaneous events. After the approval, the town will collect a initial payment, but the trade-off on that is that the project is then as of right, subject to design standards, but as of right. No discretionary denial can be had. And then after the project obtains building permits, the state will kick out a second payment of $3,000 per unit. Both affordable and market rate would count in that computation.
I think too, if I may just weigh in briefly, what we're really asking of town meeting at this point is the ability to acquire the land. There are various options in the future for us, but we'll be back to town meeting after negotiating after the acquisition on what's going to happen there. So this exercise is really to make sure that we know that we can do something there in the location once we acquire it, and you still end up in the black and have really affordable housing there is our goal, to make sure the site can meet that demand. So
this format runs on questions. So if anyone has any further questions, please.
Yeah, I'm going to be answering the questions and working them
Okay.
through the Q&A. So the first question is asking why Winchester would ever build anything other than 100% rental, meaning that I would imagine that all of the units could count. So so that's our first question.
I can start answering that a little bit, and then others can chime in. The reason I imagine that a developer would want to build for sale housing is that you'd get more money. So when you sell the units, there's a greater value to a developer than just rental unit. So in the RFP, you want to make it an attractive thing. So that's why we put both options, the rental and the for sale. And I imagine there would be affordable units in the for sale, so those units would count as well.
Thanks, Maura. Did someone else want to answer that, or if not, we can keep moving?
The only other thing I would say is it's would give people looking for a home ownership opportunity that's affordable, an option. It just we kind of have a deficit of those in town as well.
Okay, moving on to the next question. It says, how many of the designs included commercial space on the first floor, since this property is currently zoned as a commercial property? So none of them at the moment had. Yeah. If you want to take that, Cliff. Yep.
Yeah, that's true, but it doesn't at all mean that. I mean, it certainly would favor putting commercial space in, would favor the schemes that put the larger building on the main street for sure. But again, I imposed, it was a self-imposed 2.5 story limit as opposed to 3-story limit. So it would be very easy in the schemes that show the larger building on the main street or wrapping around the corner to integrate commercial space into the building. And certainly if you were willing, if it made sense to the town to go ahead and go to 3 stories, as in the scheme that you've seen previously. And as I said, I think could still have a roofscape that would fit into existing context. It really would not be a problem at all to put a commercial space, to include commercial space in 2 of these 3 schemes.
Thanks, Cliff. We're just gonna. I'm hope you don't think I'm rushing everyone, but I'm just gonna try to get through because there's a number of questions that are coming through that I'd like to get through. So I'm combining a couple questions here. I think Mark Borbowski, I believe you'd probably be the best person to answer this question. The questions is, what is a 40R and what's the difference between a 40B and a 40R?
40B is the comprehensive permit statute that allows an applicant to construct affordable housing by more or less superseding local zoning control. 40R is an overlay district that requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting. It has its own zoning, so you're not superseding zoning, you're creating zoning for a new district with its own rules. And then once that is created, the only process standing between the applicant and a building permit is what's called plan approval. And the town, because it receives an upfront payment upon approving the zoning, has lost its ability to say no. There is only approval under plan approval, not a discretionary no. The state kicks out some money, as I just described, with the sliding scale based on the number of net new units that are being created, and $3,000 for each unit upon the issuance of the building permit. 40B does not carry any financial reward of the same sort. 40R is very strictly a 2/3 vote of the representative town meeting. It either passes or it doesn't. 40B has its own process at the Board of Appeals, and it's a very different dynamic.
Can I ask a quick question to you, Mark?
Sure.
So you mentioned the plan approval. Who adjudicates that?
The town is free to name its own plan approval authority. I know in Dartmouth, for example, I believe it's a member of the Board of Selectmen, the ZBA, and the Planning Board. Most towns, it usually ends up being the Planning Board, but
Okay.
it's totally a matter of self-selection.
Okay. So you still maintain some control over the design of the development?
Yeah, the zoning that you create generally has 2 components. One is the performance standards that we always are used to, uses available, dimensional attributes, things of that sort. And then there is also a possibility of preparing design standards. All this is approvable by the state. You can't go
Great.
off on your own. And the design standards have to lead to a decision. It can't be subjective in nature, so that the applicant would get denied. But reasonable design standards are approved as a part of the process.
Terrific. Okay.
Just keep moving. What's the value of the land or price for sale, and would these be reserved for employees? The assessment of the land was 3 point. I can get back to the exact article. 3 point. I believe it was 3.125. And then would these be reserved for employees? There can be local preference for the affordable units, definitely. That can be part of how the project works. So it's 3.15 million. We're going to go on to the next unique question. What is the large shaded out building on the left down Swanton Street?
I'd have to look at an image to answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get
that
there.
one. Sorry.
I'm guessing it was during the proposals. The left shaded out here. I believe this is WinCam.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
It's
the
a
WinCam
commercial.
building.
Yeah, it's a
Yep.
commercial use there. Yep.
Okay. We'll just keep moving. Sorry. Can the town make stipulations in the RFP that units are low carbon footprint? For example, use heat pumps rather than gas heat, have parking canopy with solar panels and charging stations. These are certainly things that you can get points for. There's and that they could be put into the RFP I don't know if anyone else wanted to expand.
I
on
would
that.
add that the state, depending upon the funding source too, some of the funding sources certainly give preference to projects that are forward-looking as far as sustainability is concerned. So it would likely, the funding source, certainly tax credit sources are highly competitive, and you get a lot more points the better you do on the sustainability side.
And I can add too, sorry, Maura, but with the Waterfield lot RFP, that was a major interest of the town, and we did get great responses with solar panels and heat pumps as part of that building. Frankly, the developers want to build that way as well. So and they are really, in our experience, on the cutting edge of that technology. So it really kind of meshes with the values of the town, especially after just adopting the climate action plan. So certainly. And I will mention too, as I had indicated before, we'll be coming back to Springtown meeting with a plan. The group that will be negotiating after the acquisition of the land, negotiating a deal through the RFP, will include members of town meeting from that neighborhood. I think that the select board feels strongly that this has been a long process for the neighborhood there, and I think there'll be people that need to or feel that they want to contribute to what this building is going to be in the end. So I just wanted to make that clear as well. Sorry, Maura.
That's okay. I didn't really. Yep, go on.
Oh, no, I was gonna go on to a new question if we weren't finished, so I please continue, Maura.
But you can go on.
Okay. So there's 3 more questions that we have. We're going to try to get through them real quick. Is there a reason the new owner isn't being given a chance to propose development? I guess that's directed at select board members.
So
Go ahead.
we have reached out and connected with the current property owner. Nothing's been proposed to us formally. In our discussions and conversations, it seemed like that our interests were far apart. We would need to rezone this area, and I think what they would be looking for would not be interests in the interest of the town. And I think that we've been waiting for something to come along and be really built here for a long time. And as we saw with the Right Lock Farm project, the longer you wait and have properties that are quite frankly blighted, then what happens with the Melanson project, you've got a good project and the financing falls through and somebody else comes in, and really nothing's happened since the purchase has been made of the property. So there always will be the option for the developer to come forward with a plan, and we will continue to meet with the developer. I shouldn't say the developer, the owner of the current owner of the property, to see if their development is something the town would be interested in. As I said, the taking of the property is an option for us, but we would look very favorably on a straight purchase of the land as well, seeing as there's not anything being proposed or developed there right now. In fact, I think the owners had it advertised for rentals of those individual units for quite a long time now. So it's an indication to us that it's not ready for prime time as far as development.
Okay, we're going to try to keep going here. There's kind of putting a couple questions here from one individual about if the town buys the land, the town should receive kind of the max benefit in terms of the affordable housing SHI percentage. So it should be 100% rental. That's not necessarily a question, but the idea is that I think that's more for the RFP than for this particular zoning article. And then the next question, which is maybe directed more towards legal here, is how does the town manage the conflict of interest between being a developer versus regulating the development? As in both the Winning Farm and the Right Lock Farm situations, the conflict was problematic. So maybe some select board members about the history and then any potential conflicts of interest related to that from legal.
So, part of what we're doing here is we're passing the project off to a developer through the RFP process. As you hear with the Waterfield process, we did an RFQ first to identify the best developers possible, and then those developers were welcomed into the RFP process to respond to what we're looking for. So we were very happy with the responses that we got to those projects. And so our acquisition really would be to pass it off to the best development that the town and the neighborhood feels is possible. So we want to mitigate the town's risk as much as possible and do not want to be in the development business. So Right Lock Farm and Winning Farm were kind of unique situations, but they really ended up with great outcomes for the town, even though they're very different projects.
I think that kind of arm's length transaction insulates the town from any charge that there's conflict of interest. There was a recent land court case within the last couple of years where a town, which shall remain nameless, had a piece of property that they wanted to get back to the private sector, but before they did, they rezoned it and they maximized its value. It was challenged as spot zoning, and the judge of the land court ruled that indeed the town's public purpose, which was to make as much money as they possibly could, was something to consider. But at the end of the day, the private benefit outweighed the public benefit, and the court invalidated the zoning. So we're strictly avoiding that by either looking at the possibility of a friendly 40B or a rezoning in cooperation with somebody who's basically in a purchase and sale agreement situation and carrying the ball themselves going forward.
Right, I think we need to probably, to stick to our timeline, move on to the Waterfield discussion too, because that is complicated. And we will continue to take questions through the town manager's office or members of the select board and try to get answers to people certainly between now and town meeting.
Okay, so we'll now be moving on to the next article, Article 13. This is the language for Article 13. This is to see if the town will vote to authorize the select board to lease for 99 years or less the plan of land known as the Waterfield parking lot. So this would it's specifically to use it such based upon the responses of a rather lengthy RFQ and RFP process that the town started last year and then ended this year with the RFP from July 1st of 2020. I'm now going to be turning over the rest of the presentation to Mr. Barry Fratkin of JM Goldson, who helped us, along with Francis Goyas Floor of Mass Housing, develop the RFP and has helped us, ushered us through the entire process. So Barry, if you're ready, why don't you go take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everyone. My name is Barry Fratkin, and I'm a community planner with JM Goldson. Just to give you a little background about the project, this was a partnership between the town of Winchester and Mass Housing. The impetus was really coming from the housing production plan and the needs and strategies that were identified in that, especially for affordable housing and transit-oriented development. So that HPP process occurred back in 2017 to 2018, and that led into the RFQ, which is a request for qualifications. The town reached out to several developers to get a list of their qualifications, experience of the team, and why they'd be qualified to develop the site. And that led into a selection which narrowed down the field of potential developers, and an RFP, request for proposals, was issued, which had additional requirements and basically was set up to narrow down the scope of what could be developed on the site and to get the best possible options, a variety of options that could be developed there. And so that process was starting last winter. We closed the RFP in August after a series of meetings, answering questions from the developers. And then 5 of those submissions met the minimum criteria. And based on the review of those submissions, there was one final preferred developer selected from that process. And now we're working towards a land disposition in spring of 2021, I believe. So the redevelopment objectives for the Waterfield site are mixed income housing with a preference towards rental housing. Most of the units should be for households earning between 30 and 120% of the area median income, and at least 25% of those should be for households earning less than 80% of area median income to meet that affordability requirement. 10% of the units include 3 bedrooms, and this helps to ensure those units will make it onto the subsidized housing inventory. Also, design considerations, making sure that because of the historic downtown that this building would integrate well with the surroundings, considering the scale, the style, the height of the structure, and providing some public amenities and access for neighboring businesses, as well as access to the train station. And then finally, from an environmental sustainability perspective, trying to minimize, if not completely eliminate, fossil fuels through all electric construction, and also incorporating other non-energy features like stormwater management and other green elements of the roof. You can go ahead, Brian. In terms of criteria within the RFP, there were a series of minimum criteria, just sort of yes or no, do they meet, did the developers meet those criteria? First, conforming with all the requirements that were laid out in that document, having a minimum of 5 years of experience with affordable housing, at least 25% of the units had to be affordable, and a successful track record of 3 or more projects, as well as having the financial capacity to get through the pre-development phase of the project. And then everyone who met those criteria was then evaluated against these comparative criteria, where they were considered either not advantageous, advantageous, or highly advantageous for all of these. And those included some of the affordability, design, and cultural and public amenities aspects, as well as traffic and parking. So here's a look at the preferred developer. This is Civico Tregorth. Their project, you can see on the upper left, this is an overhead view of the parking lot with the potential building layout superimposed on that. And this does keep the Chamber of Commerce building. It has a public plaza area that would lead into the train station entrance. And there's a gateway to get into the site that's right across from the town common. And there is a driveway to maintain access for the neighboring businesses there. And there would be parking on the ground level and below grade. This would be 3 to 4 stories high, 40 to 48 feet, 60 rental units, a mix of studios and 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, solar panel array on the roof, 40 public parking spaces, and then resident parking would be below grade. And also would have a third-party property manager that would offer support services to the lower income residents. And they would be seeking small business retail tenants for that gateway mixed use in the front of the structure. In terms of the next steps, the town will be negotiating with the development team, working out some of the details of the land disposition, and then there would be a potential vote on that at Springtown meeting, and then working towards the design, permitting, and financing through 2021. And there's a series of steps to get all the different sources of financing together for the project. And thanks to everyone else involved with the project, Lisa, Brian, Francis from Mass Housing, and Jen Goldson.
Thanks, Barry. So we're gonna try to do this as much as we can, like last time, through the question and answer function on Zoom. And I have not seen any at the moment. I have seen a couple of people use the chat as well, and I have been answering those. But that is also empty. So
just to, while we're waiting, Brian, just put a finer point on it. We will be, as I mentioned before, coming back to Springtown meeting for final approval. These concept designs could be changed. It could look very different based on our negotiations with the developer. So we like what we see from Civico, and we hope to get somewhere close, but there's always options there, and we'll be working with the finance committee and smaller negotiating team to work on this once we are have the permission from town meeting and the authority to close the land. I see some questions are popping up, so I'll be
Yeah,
quiet.
this is great. So talking about parking, so would there be daytime use of parking for the public? And then some other questions related to commuter and other public parking. So the way that they have proposed it to us is that that they would have potentially 40 public parking spaces at grade that we can choose to use in any way the town sees fit. In terms of, most of them could be for businesses as well as for the 2 and 3 hour parking rather than commuters. It seems like what we've found is that that most of the downtown businesses, as well as people in general, would prefer to have, if you had to pick between 50-50, rather than having 50% of the spaces be commuter and 50% be open for businesses and employees. Most people felt that there should be more for the businesses and for the shoppers than for commuters. But it's up. So that kind of answers that, is that if under this scheme, it's 40 of public spaces to choose any way we want that are certainly for daytime parking. I'm just going to keep going down here. What are the financial considerations for the town? There certainly is a lot to think about here. Mike or Susan, did you want to start off, and we can kind of go from there?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is we want this to be a very viable, long-term, 99-year project. So we want it to be well constructed, and we want it to be attractive, and we want it to be, occupied. It's all rental. So you have to kind of balance that against the fact that it, 2/3 of the units are going to be affordable. So we have to be realistic in our expectations.
Thanks for that, Susan. Anybody else want to comment? It's hard to comment when we haven't drawn up the entire the whole agreement, which, as Mr. Betancourt said, it will come to a later town meeting.
Do you mind if I just quickly jump in and say that
Please.
in terms of the picking financial considerations, literally, certainly we're looking at potentially over $100,000 in annual tax revenue per the pro forma in the proposal. Certainly the town is looking for a upfront payment from the developer, sort of an acquisition or sort of upfront price. And then we're also considering a annual rental payment.
I think too, I'll add, Brian, one of the reasons why we chose Civico, I think it was mentioned earlier, is that they are willing to invest in underground parking, which enables the maximum amount of parking for the town on the site, but also keeps the building height as low as possible. So that's really the benefit, and really the wire that they were kind of balancing on in with their proposal. And we thought that they did the best job at responding to that, because that was a major target for us too. How much parking can we keep? The town is going to engage in a full study of the town center for parking options as well. So that was a request from the chamber as we're looking at these projects. And this really, the impetus for this project started really 15 plus, almost 20 years ago now, to really bring more residences to the town center, but also bring more life to our businesses and support commerce in the town center. It's the more foot traffic we have, the more our businesses are able to survive and profit and thrive. And so that was when we studied the town center and the deficiencies there, that was one of the problems that we were trying to solve. In addition to, as Lisa mentioned, the tax benefits to us on the revenue side, direct payments, as well as affordable housing piece.
We're just going to keep moving. The number of units seem quite high for this area. Is 60 units negotiable to a lesser number of units? I think the short answer is yes. The question is the will of, the will of the town, I guess. Other proposals did come in with fewer units, so it's possible if that's the question. I don't know if anyone else wanted to jump in on that or not. Okay. So could there be additional parking offered from the residential inventory during the day? Okay, so now I see what you're saying. So this is in addition to the already public spots, there's portions of the residential spots that will be gone, potentially gone during the day. That's something that we can certainly talk to them about. Again, that's really more of how much the town wants to be pushing to get those additional spots in terms of where the negotiations lie. But if the question is, could there be additional parking offered from the residential inventory during the day? Yes, it's possible. I don't know the will of the people involved, however. What is the expected school population from this plan? There was no school population that was as part of the RFP that they had to supply. It's possible that I hate to call Susan out here, but she was on the school committee for quite a while and potentially could weigh in on what your thoughts are about that, Susan.
I think that there has to be. I'm looking around to see if I can find my copy, but usually you assume that there will be some school-age children living in units that have 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms. And I don't know off the top of my head what that percentage is in this scheme, the way it's laid out now. So there would be some number of school-age children, but we haven't really, focused in on the exact number of, it hasn't really been completely designed, and we don't know the exact distribution of the unit sizes with the number of bedrooms. So yes, there will be some, but it's hard to kind of put a final number out there.
We'll say too, to follow up on Susan's remarks, that the goal for the town for Article 12 and 13 is affordable housing, and we need to maintain our safe harbor by making progress towards our subsidized housing inventory. So the more units that we get that are affordable, the better. Mass Housing has said they will give us credit for units that bring kids into them. So they're looking at a policy decision where they are trying to get families into the units that are affordable. So I know that we've asked them the question in the past of, can we just restrict these to elderly housing and not have an impact on their school system? And they said we will not be credited towards our subsidized housing inventory for those units then. So we are in safe harbor now, and we've got another year year and a half, and then after that we'll be resorting to still be subject to 40B developments, and they may not be what we want. So I think that we're on track here to increase our units, but also maintain the safe harbor that we've received. And anybody can correct me on that too, Barry. I don't know if that's, if I'm correct there, but.
Yeah, I'll just mention that as long as there's at least 25% of the rental units affordable below 80%, then all the units will count towards the SHI.
If they're rental units.
If rental.
Okay.
Okay, we'll just go on to the next one. With underground parking, is flooding a significant risk? I don't know who to actually give this question to. The only thing I can say is that a number of very highly skilled teams looked at this site, and they did not have, they don't have the full geotechnical data because it doesn't exist yet. So there does need to be survey work done. With from the few projects that I've been involved with, and others can chime in as well. It's really just a question of how much money has to be put into the project to make that work. They were the only project. Civico was the only developer team to propose underground parking. I believe that the other ones did not propose underground parking, not necessarily because they saw flooding as a risk, but because it was, very expensive, and some unknowns under there with the MWRA sewer line as well as next to a railroad. So those are they're hedging their bets there.
Brian, can I just say that it's actually below grade parking. It's not underground parking, which I think are two
Good. Yep,
slightly
good
different
point.
things because there's a gradient difference there. We did ask this question actually several times of the developer, and just to let them know that this was something that we were interested in exploring further. We wanted to make sure that they had done their due diligence, and they I think have a partner with construction background, and they were pretty certain, at least in their interview process, that that could be done, and did sort of emphasize that it was below grade, not underground. But certainly, with any flooding issues, the town would want them and us to do our due diligence and look at the proper drainage system to put in place.
Thanks for that clarification, Lisa. That is a big distinction that I failed to mention. So the last questions that are at least on the question and answer function. I see that a number have come through the chat, but I haven't gotten there yet. I've just been going with the ones on the question and answer function. Essentially, how many? This part of my question was answered already, but I still would like to know how many affordable units do we need in the town, and by when? So right now we're just over 3% of our units that are on the subsidized housing index. The goal is set by the state for 10%. If we reach 10%, that's one way to receive safe harbor, which allows us to essentially push away either irresponsible or bad or developments that we don't want related to 40Bs. So the goal right now that we've gone through the housing production plan is to reach safe harbor not through the 10% goal, but by the progress goal. So if we actually build a half or 1% of units that are deed restricted affordable at 80% or below and count on the SHI, if we produce 1% of those, of the total number of units, we get 2 years of safe harbor, which is what happened with the 19 to 35 River Street project. So that actually got us into safe harbor until March of 22. So right now we're in safe harbor until March of 22. So I believe I've answered that question. I'm going to go now to the chat function. If anyone else wanted to talk about the town's objectives in affordable housing, now would be the time, but I need just a second to go over to the chat.
Sure, and I'll just mention too, Brian, part of the RFP process and why we were working with Jennifer Golson and her team and Francis with Mass Housing is trying to identify a proposal that developers would respond to that is economically viable. So we really struggled with asking for, we really would want to say, let's make this 50% affordable. The Carol's question I see there, and but the economics of that, where they're building the project, they don't work out if you keep adding more affordable units. So the market rate units really subsidize the affordable units and enable them to build really a nice project. So I think that's a factor as well. We're not we're not developing it ourselves. We're not building it ourselves. So there's costs that go into that, especially when that's why we, as Lisa had mentioned, we really drilled in. We had a separate meeting with the developers about this question of the feasibility of the underground parking, because we wanted to know whether or not that could happen, because it's not so much a question of risk, as Brian said, but a question of cost. So you can do almost anything you want to, but does it affect the overall cost of this, which makes it not feasible in the future if you're adding 25% affordable units.
Right. The number of questions still to go here. So how do the businesses feel about the Waterfield development given the potential loss of parking? So maybe Lisa has the best pulse on the Chamber of Commerce.
Sure. So we did include the chamber in terms of various steps in the process. So we did ask them for input along the way, as well as to sit on the interview committee to come up with the questions and to give us their opinion. I think one of the many reasons why they chose Civico is because of the parking issue. So it was something they reviewed in terms of the proposals. It was something they asked about, and then in their recommendation to us, again, one of the reasons why they chose Civical is because they had the highest number of parking overall and the highest number of parking spaces available to the public.
Thanks for that. So it looks like most of the questions have been answered up above. How many units could we actually allow? Can we make it bigger than 60 units? I think this is, again, more town will, meaning that LDA eventually would have to pass town meeting. So could we make it bigger than 60 units? Yes, it's possible that it could go there, but town meeting would and the select board, everyone would still have to approve that. I think I'll keep moving.
Brian, can I just maybe add to that, because that's come up several times.
Mhm.
Certainly, there is a trade-off between the number of units and what those units compose of. So I know that the development requires a certain percentage of 3 bedrooms, so that's fixed. But all the different proposals had various combinations of studios, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms. So there are certainly size considerations. So if you said they had a lot of 2 bedrooms and we want to make those 1 bedrooms, if they had a lot of studios, but we think they really should be 1 or 2 bedrooms, those are things that will sort of inadvertently sort of change the overall number as well. So there's a number of considerations that we're, I guess, trying to have, but it seems like just based on all the proposals, I think the lowest was 54, the highest was 65. So it seems like if there's going to be some sort of change in terms of bedrooms going up or down, I think realistically, because we've had 5 proposals of very qualified developers who have really studied this, it's gonna still be within that same range.
Thanks. Is it possible, in order to make these more units affordable, could we potentially pass an override to make that happen? Yeah, go for it, Mike.
I mean, it's possible, but I think it's not probable. We've got the Lynch School project, which will be up for an override in a year or so. We've got operating overrides that are probably coming in the near future as well. So we're just on the tail of an operating override. We're looking towards decreased revenue at the state level. So I think it would be a great idea if we could do it, all things being the same. But we have some commitments that are coming up in the near future. We still have flood mitigation work to finish. Morocco school is not too far behind as well, probably 5 years after. So we finished Lynch, we'll probably be looking towards Morocco. So to squeeze in an override for that would be difficult. But I think that what we can look at is maybe setting aside some of the revenues of some of these projects to buy more units in other projects that we're working on. So maybe some of the revenue that we're getting as payments to this project can go directly towards affordable housing. I think that would make sense. We missed an opportunity several years ago when we had the Community Preservation Act. I don't want to get too far afield here, but that's another ongoing revenue source that the town would be able to use for affordable housing, and we missed that opportunity. So it may be something that we can bring up again, and maybe that's another way to reach that goal, Carol.
It looks like the last question is related to that as well. Is what about a real estate transfer tax for affordable housing? So this is something that's done in many communities, and affordable housing is one of the few things that you can use for Community Preservation Act money. So that's what this question is going towards. Is why hasn't the town kind of gone forward with CPA? CPA has been in front of the town several years ago, and I know there are a number of people in town that would like to get CPA passed. So that's certainly something that I said. Yeah, a number of people are actually working on trying to get passed. So that would speak to your point about the real estate transfer tax for affordable housing. It looks like we have one last question, and I think this will be the final one. Says, am I wrong in thinking that we need an average of 42 rental units annually for the next 17 years, 10 or 11 of which would be de-restricted in perpetuity, while the balance would be market rate but qualifying as part of the SHI? The total required will be a little over 700 units at the end of 17 years. This is something these numbers are, I can't tell you off the top of my head exactly, but these numbers look relatively, in the ballpark. I don't think we have the land, and I think a lot of people know this in Winchester, that we don't really necessarily have the land, and certainly anytime quick, unless some drastic changes are made, that we would get up to 10% without some very, very large projects in kind of key old industrial areas. So that's just that's my personal opinion. I think the only way that we're going to get there is large transfer of land from old industrial areas in town, which there's only a few. That's probably the only way that we really could get to 10. But once we get to 10, we actually have to stay at 10. So it's never really over. It's trying to find the good projects, build them while you're in safe harbor, and then so you have as much control over the projects as possible. But during this whole time we have control, we're still building. We don't really stop.
Thanks,
So
Brian.
I believe
very
that's
well
all
put.
we have. Sorry, back to you, Susan.
I was going to say that was very well put. It's a complicated set of calculations, and we just have to basically keep working on it.
So there's one more question, Brian. So it was a thought about putting more parking down low, even if it's a flood risk, since the floods are generally predictable and cars should be removed. So actually, when we asked the developer about adding more parking, their proposal, which is one of the attractive things about the proposal, has a very nice plaza, but they have talked about sort of removing some of the plaza and actually being able to put more on-grade or at-grade parking. So that's probably more realistic if we wanted to add more spaces. Then I'll just say one last thing, is I answered somebody's question about where to find more information. That was in the Q&A, so I posted the link that has the proposals, it has the videos, it has some of the Q&A, it has the RFP, it has the public comment, and probably some other information, I think a financial analysis and so on.
it looks like someone's hand is actually and has been up for this whole time. I don't know. You can, if for some reason they cannot use the question and answer function, but I noticed this person had their hand up at the beginning and then figured that they would. But I guess we'll take one last question because they did have their hand up since the very beginning. So sorry, everybody. A lot of talk. So if you, Janice, if you want to unmute yourself, it's possible maybe it was an accident.
I don't know if Janice is on a phone, maybe. But it's
yeah,
star
I'm
six to unmute yourself if you're on the phone.
We can reach out to Jan too if she's.
Yeah.
I think it's been up there for a little while. I think you're right.
Okay. Well, anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. Being informed for a town meeting is extremely important, so we're glad that you decided to come and ask questions. I don't know if anyone had any more announcements while we have everyone's attention. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and go vote.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you.